Good evening. I usually start 5 minutes before 7, but today I couldn't because I was distracted. So I'm just I like to give shout outs. Maria TGUE. Yvonne, all right, I'm gonna put you in real quick. Shout out to Atlas. Now I don't have glasses, so I can't see. I need glasses. So welcome all. I'm gonna invite you in right now, Yvonne. My name is Antonio Morales. This is the 7th episode of Unpacking White Supremacy in the Mental Health Field. I am the founder of the Liberated Self Therapeutic Services, LLC, and my intention really is to deal with and challenge the adverse impact of white supremacy. So my private practice is primarily aimed at Black and brown folk. And so I won't say much about the private practice. You can go on to theliberatedself.org, www.theliberatedself.org, and you can read up on it. Before I begin, I just want to share that the intention of this IG live series is to bring awareness to how white supremacy shows up in the mental health field. And the audience is really intended to reach people of color. So that means not only clinicians and people who are working in the mental health field or mental health professionals, but also clients, Black and brown clients, or people who are BIPOC or people of color. And the reason why I'm saying this in this way is because I've been dealing with Karens in my inbox, right? And these are Karens who happen to be other mental health professionals and who happen to be white folk. And I've been dealing with the white fragility and the white rage and the backlash for even having this conversation. We can't talk about what's really going on, right, without people trying to stop the conversation. We need to be able to have these conversations in order to bring awareness to this topic, because ultimately this is an ethical dilemma. When you're thinking about mental health, if we can't wrap our minds around the impact of white supremacy and racism and how that sort of plays a role in how we receive services and how we provide services, then we're not really doing something that's with integrity, right? So it is an ethical dilemma when we talk about white supremacy. And I don't understand why other mental health professionals who happen to be white can't respect that or accept that, right? At least honor the fact that this is real and not thinking that this is about making political statements or trying to degrade or diminish the value of our white counterparts. That's not the point of this. The point of this is to bring awareness to this topic, because it's really an impact. There's impacts that we're dealing with as professionals and as people, clientele who access mental health services and resources. So I just want to say that because when other people end up in my inbox about themselves feeling offended around this topic, it just feels like something is off in our society, because we're just addressing challenges that we're dealing with. And not to just address it, but to think about how do we sort of create solutions around that. So before you even talk about solutions, you have to bring awareness to the topic, right? We got to consider the impact. We got to consider how this is impacting ourselves as clinicians, but also, again, the clients. And I also noticed that one of our IG lives was taken down from Instagram, which is Unpacking White Supremacy. And I don't know what that's about, but it was one of my guests that his live got deleted with me. or we got deleted together. And so I don't know what that's about, but I'm imagining that there must have been somebody who reported the video because they got offended about something that was said in that IG live. And so that's what I'm dealing with. That's the space I'm in. I'm gonna light Yvonne. Hold up. I'm gonna light some sage today because last week I had the Palo Santo. Today I got the sage because we need to clean out these spirits. Because I'm telling you, like, these spirits are crazy. Like, this is some stuff happening in our society where, you know, we have to be mindful of and just like do whatever we can to like eradicate the spirits, because it's not healthy, nor is it conducive to our work. So Yvonne Perez is my next guest for our 7th episode, and I just want to tell you about Yvonne. I know Yvonne from my old job at West Brooklyn, and Yvonne is like one of the coolest people I know. But besides that, she's an amazing social worker, and I felt like she would bring so much to this conversation from her perspective that will really add to the conversation. And so that's why Yvonne is here. Yes, while white supremacy breeds distrust and envy. Listen, don't get me started because I already got started. I don't want to go on a rant. But yeah, Yvonne is an amazing social worker. I've seen her with her clients do super amazing work. And what I love about Yvonne the most is the fact that she has a commitment to her community. And we'll hear about her community when she gets on. And I understand that kind of commitment, right? When we're in the work for our community, we're not in it for anything else but our community. And so Yvonne is one of those people who has a real commitment for her community. And I love that. That's amazing. And so I just want to, and besides Yvonne being amazing as a social worker, she's also, we used to go out every single Thursdays after work, and we used to go get our dance on. And we were like Dancing with the Stars. Anywhere she and I went, we would hit the dance floor together as partners, and we always killed it. So anyway, I'm going to invite you in now, Yvonne, because I know you're waiting for me. And we could get this party started. Yvonne is not late. Techie counselor. So let me find you, Yvonne. I know you in here. Yvonne already requested, but I gotta just... Okay. Wait, Yvonne, where are you? Okay, let me see something. Okay. Yvonne, there you go. Hola.
Hi, this is like the first time. I mean, I have an IG, but like I don't use it. So this is new for me.
That's fine. It's okay because I'm like so distracted today with these white supremacists and the agents of white supremacy.
Have a glass of wine with me. I'm having one here.
No, I can only do lives with water. I can't mess around with because things are. And I got a new mug.
Cheers.
Cheers. So Yvonne, welcome to the live. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you because I know you're so dope, and we have an amazing connection for many years. And I would just love for you to share what you're about to share. But before we begin, I always tell everybody this, right? Any guest that comes onto the IG live, I always ask them to basically introduce themselves, but I don't want you to introduce yourself yet formally, but I want you to do an icebreaker with me. And the icebreaker basically is for you to think about your ancestors or your elders and think about, so tell me where you come from or where your people come from, and what are some of the positive characteristics or attributes that you inherited for them, and how does that show up in your life today? And that's a way to sort of honor in this moment in your body who you are, but not just because you're by yourself, but because you stand on so many shoulders. And I want to honor that in this moment.
Mm-hmm. So where are my ancestors from? So my family comes from Mexico. I mean, I can go from like different generations up, but like I think the culture I identify the most is Mexican. And so, you know, my family comes from like Mexico City and Puebla, the beautiful state of Puebla. And, you know, a lot of also my family, specifically from my mom's side, she is indigenous. So she, you know, I don't remember exactly like what group her family comes from, but you know, I think my grandmother, her mom, Spanish isn't even her first language, rather it was her dialect. um, and so my dad, he's more of like the European Mexican. So his family derives from like, stems from like Spain. And so, I mean, I look at my parents, right? And it was like the vast difference. Like my dad is blanquito, is like, you know, I just learned because I just met a lot of his family. They would nickname him, you know, unfortunately, El Ruso because he's tall and white,
Uh-huh.
with skin, white complexion. And then my mom was, you know, bajita and more of like mestiza complexion. So they're a blend. But you know, I identify heavily with like the Mexican indigenous background. And so to your question of like what's their legacy that I keep is just this the idea, the principle of just hard work, right? Like I think like we're with like many like the immigrant experiences, like they immigrated to this country back in 85.
Mm-hmm.
85, so they, you know, they were here for some time, for a long time, being undocumented, and but they came to strive for the American dream,
Mm-hmm.
what that looked like. And you know, I'm sure they both have, like I know my mom passed, and so my dad, both my mom and my dad had their own ideas of what that American dream looked like. And
Mm-hmm.
so they saw, they wanted their children, so I'm the youngest of four, strive for like the best for themselves. And being important for them, they were like, listen, education and hard work, like that goes hand in hand. And you know, my mom being my mom, and given her experiences, her traumatic experiences that she grew up with and she experienced as a woman,
Mm-hmm.
he would tell me as a female too, that you know, people come and go in your life and you can
Mm-hmm.
do a lot of things, but something that never you would never lose is education. And so she was like, education must be something that you have to remember and hold on to. And so um I think it was just, you know, it's the importance of education. I find it to be key, fundamental, as well as it's aligned with hard work and work. You know, like luchar. You know, la lucha is like be get up and rub it off and like, listen, you got to do what you got to do, and hard work goes a long way.
So what I'm hearing inside of what your explanation is, it sounds like what you inherited, and then I know education is sort of the backdrop, but it feels like discipline and focus,
Yeah.
right? With discipline especially, right? Because it takes a lot to like continue grinding even when things are challenging. But when you sort of keep grinding at that, and some people don't celebrate the grind culture because that's sort of an offshoot of white supremacy. But what I'm hearing still is discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Like,
I see that in you because you've always been very, very disciplined in how you do your work. Like it was very always on. It was like very, it was so different compared to our other colleagues. You were super focused, super disciplined, and it really trickled down to the people you were working with, right? Because you can see even their mindset being shifted by you modeling that discipline,
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. True. That is true. Love my parents, and many of the
Uh-huh.
they would always make this distinction of like, okay, Yvonne, like at least you have the conditions, like a desk, a chair, and in the summer you're not, you know, out in the sun and you're like, you know, in air conditioning, right? And so it's always kind of been like, all right, be grateful for what you've got and keep it pushing, and
Right,
like
right,
keep
right.
working, keep working. Pero la factoría, like the factory, right? So that was always kind of the message, right? That was the message that I grew up with. And it's like, all right, keep, you know, chambitas, be a hard worker.
Yeah, no, for real, it's true. I get that, and I see that. I see that in you. So now I want you to, after you share that, I want you to think about, well, tell us. And I'm sorry, I have, you know, what's in my head is so crazy. Like, you know, like when you go to sleep and there's like some people count sheep.
Yeah.
right? You know what I'm talking about, right? So
Yeah.
all I see is Karens, like all around. They're just floating around me, right? Like faces of Karens all around me, because I feel really sort of, and I just want to share this to be transparent, right, about the space I'm in. I feel very sort of, um, uh, like when I think about why I left my last job, it was so that I don't deal with discrimination anymore, right? And that was a big sacrifice on my part because I'm letting go of a stable, check and stuff like this, right? And to go out and on a limb and do my private practice is not easy. And I'm just sort of setting the foundation. I'm not even really doing the private practice, really. And so when I have people getting into my inbox, people that I don't know, right, sort of attacking, like unpacking white supremacy in the mental health field, and then attacking me because of that. All I see now, like right now, there's just Karens floating around me, like almost like little like spirits, you know. And so forgive me if I'm a little distracted. I'm trying to like listen. I've been doing the sage. I don't know if we should do like a prayer or something before we begin, but I just wanted to ground myself in the now. But I have to be honest about where I'm at because I don't like to be, full of shit. I'm gonna keep it real. And so, you have any like suggestions?
I mean, that's kind of, I think, kind of centralizing yourself with what you're in control or what can you handle at the moment. Like what's real, what's reality right now.
Right.
So I think channeling that energy and that motivation that you very much have when it comes, like you started off this segment, right? Kind of really talking about like what is your purpose and your mission when it comes to this project of yours. And I recognize that and power to you. So hone in on that, right? And
That's
let
right.
feelings of anger, of frustration, of annoyance, of like, look, these people at it again.
Right.
Channel that, and this is really the reason why you're doing this, right?
That's right.
To spread a message. And I appreciate that you are very intentional as far as the people who you recruit to have to showcase on your series, and like all mental health practitioners. And thank you that you did it in March because it's Women's Awareness and Heritage Month too. So I was like, yeah.
Ah.
um and so, and it's also Social Work Awareness Month last week, and so as a social worker, I'm excited. So, really like focus on that and like allow yourself to ground into that, because that's in this hour, that's what you're in control of. You can't really control what all the other Karens have or will say, but what you can do is how you how much energy do you wish to put in place in this next hour that we're going to be here and for on, like, like you're doing the work. And this, I think the purpose of this series is to spread awareness and to motivate and or to collaborate, to brainstorm on like solutions and like works that can support the work that you're intending to. So let that be, let
Right.
that
Word. Because it really. All right.
enough,
So.
enough.
So Yvonne, tell us about what you're doing right now. What's your current position, and how long you've been in the mental health profession? And beyond that, what inspired you to get into the mental health field? So now you can formally introduce yourself.
Yeah, all right. So I am Yvonne. I am LMSW. I'm a social worker. So I currently I'm a high school social worker at West Brooklyn. So I was at West when you and I first met back in 2014. So that's when I started there. And I was there for 6 years. And then in that time period, I was inspired to enter my master's program in social work. I graduated 2019, and then I was like, all right, I want to practice as a social worker. And your girl is $1,000 in debt, might as well practice in that, right? And, and so I left West Brooklyn for a year and a half, and that's where I got my first gig as officially a high school social worker at a charter school in East Harlem. And then I was given the opportunity to come back to West Brooklyn in December,
Mhm.
and did. So now I work for the DO, I work on the DOE side at West Brooklyn, which is a transfer high school in Brooklyn.
Uh-huh.
And that's my full time, but I still do part time work with the charter high school that I worked with
Mhm.
previously, and so I've been doing that. But my focus and really my niche is to specialize as a family therapist. And so I've been working with Ackerman Institute for 2 years now on like just developing my practice and my skills and my abilities to be the best practitioner I can be. Um, and so how long have I been in mental health field? That's a good question, right? Like, granted, if I can say that officially, right, since I got my degree back in 2019, but I think that I've certainly been working with doing the work since, I don't know. So I entered at West in 2014, but prior to that, I was working in schools, in middle school settings. So I really didn't learn or acknowledge that I wanted to be a mental health practitioner until I made the choice to apply for grad school to be a social worker. So that was in 2015. It's 2022, so what? It's been 7 years, going on 7 years, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I would say, I guess, technically, since 2015. But truly, what inspired me, I think it's well, like I think it started off with like a way to understand me, right? Understand
Mhm.
as, I made this decision of jumping into social work in my mid-20s.
Mhm.
And I thought that, I was experiencing a lot. I recognize, like, my family history, where I come from, and those experiences with them. And, there was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of identity crisis. There was a lot of um, I misunderstood myself. I didn't understand myself for many reasons. So
Mhm.
I at the same time I was also doing fantastic work with like youth, and
Mhm.
that, I was at West, right? And so West Brooklyn is in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. And there is, I'm from the Bronx originally, so I would commute. Girl from the Bronx would commute long Brooklyn every day for 6 years. That was
I
in
remember.
that Sash. I would always be late because I was like, I was each way. Struggle was real. But I think being there, right, at West Brooklyn, and just recognizing and seeing the demographic and the population that I would work and have the pleasure of meeting and like working with, like, I was really able to identify and relate to their story and their challenge. So
Mhm.
I realized that I saw this kind of the similarity between their challenges and what I experienced growing up, what I
Mhm.
perhaps experiencing with my family, with my siblings. And so that's where I made the connection of like, let me jump in this training to understand myself, understand my community, to help myself, and at the same time provide and give back, right? And I think that ever since ever since then, I think I do not regret. I think that I love what I do, and I only hope and wish to continue growing from here.
Got it. So, it sounded like you were sort of on your quest to sort of understand yourself further, right? And to sort of get to the bottom of some of your own stuff that was sort of simmering within you. You sort of found social work as well. You found that sort of niche for yourself. And then when you worked with the students that sort of represented your community at West Brooklyn, then it sounded like it deepened your interest in the field in a
Yeah.
different way.
Yeah. And truth be told, like, that's also where I met like social workers of color. That's where I met you. I met Amy. I met Mercedes, right? And like, dang, like, it could be done. It was something that I was like, whoa, because
Yeah.
I that in my schools growing up, I only experienced white mental health practitioners, right? Whether they were guidance counselors or social workers. If I ever remember, I came in contact with, they were all white, and so I was like, oh, maybe that's an unattainable experience, or like, one, I didn't know about it really, or two, nor did I recognize that it was attainable for me, being
Right. Right.
just like the way I looked, right? And
Uh-huh.
so that only pushed me forward to be like, okay, I can do this. And I went for it.
Yeah, I mean, it really was a diverse staff, right? As far as the team that we had, which I think really nurtured each of us because I felt like not having to watch our backs in our own spaces felt very, it made us feel safe enough to take risks, right? And sort of challenge ourselves to grow. And I love that spaces where Black and brown people are working closely together because I feel like we need to be in those spaces so we don't have to like constantly feel like we're under the white gaze, like GAZE, where they're like sort of, you know, watching every move we're making as though we're gonna mess something up. So
Yes.
yeah, that was a dope experience there. All right, so thank you for sharing that. And as you know, this is Unpacking White Supremacy. So I'm gonna ask you in your own words, and there's no right or wrong answer, right? To define white supremacy for me. How do you define white supremacy? How would you describe it?
I would say describe it, yeah. So describing is like just the idea that, you know, whiteness is it's superior over everyone else, right? And that, you know, that rules and just expectations and just way of living and like just that's the way in that, you know, being white is above it all and above everyone else at the expense of other groups and unfortunately groups of color. Um, and and yeah, so it's more of like the exclusion of other people in having a say, having an influence, having representation, right? Representation matters. Um, and then yeah, how I would just describe it. And so, I mean, I guess in the sometimes something I realize, right? Like this thinking about with this question, sometimes it's easier shared and explained via examples,
Uh-huh.
right? Over perhaps just like a definition, right? So I appreciate how you asked and you distinguish, yes, a definition and or description, because I think description comes easier to speak about and it makes it more relatable, perhaps. At least that's
Right.
how I
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's beautiful about you sort of pointing out that distinction is that there's so many definitions of white supremacy. You can just and so depending on what perspective you're taking, it can sound like this or sound like this. And then there's so many perspectives, right? And so the goal is to get everyone's input, right, around white supremacy because um even though there is white equals supreme, right? That's the whole point of it. And at the end and what it really is at the core is anti-blackness because the opposite of white is black, right?
Mhm.
And so white supremacy is that. And so, I mean, in the shortest way to sort of explain it, right? It's an ideology that sort of consumes our society, and not only our society, but so many other sort of because it's global now. It's not just here. You see what happened in Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
When they let the African students get onto the train, that is white supremacy in action. I mean, people don't like to say it, but it is, right?
Yeah.
And so it's because it's making everyone else, right, like you said, less than, right, inferior, subhuman. And so I sort of asked the question in that way because it's always important to get someone else's perspective because you have a whole completely different lived experience than I do, right? Or
Yeah.
anybody else that's listening. And so we have to be able to, it's like almost like I feel like I'm doing field research. Like I'm out in these streets interviewing people about their experiences with white supremacy in the mental health field, right? And I'm collecting information, right? Because this is what we do. You have to do the research to see what other people are saying. And so
Yeah.
it's important to sort of have you say it in your own words. Now, talking about examples, how can you describe three examples, or you can share three examples where white supremacy shows up in the mental health field? Now, you don't have to go into depth. You could just be very basic and generic about it. I just want to get three examples, and then we're going to pull one out and sort of have you sort of illustrate that one further.
Yeah. So I guess kind of like in certain organizations, so like human services organizations, one can see that, you know, the leadership and administration is white heavy. And so usually like kind of the workers, the ones are in the grounds working direct work tends to be people of color. But if you look up in like the roles and in like in roles of leadership, you got majority people of color, right? And alongside that, like even in school where I attended for my master's program, like I'm appreciative of them and I learned a lot, but I had all white professors but one. And
Mm.
professor who was not white, she was the one who taught an elective class, and that elective was immigration,
Mm.
right? And so, okay, well, fantastic. But I was part-time, so my 3 years, every professor there was white.
Mm.
And also kind of this idea of like, so that's the second example. And just like the third example is like just a lot of like, even for example, I don't know, I'm kind of, I go back and forth about just even, there's this idea, right? Like, okay, so going back to my origins and my family, like when I shared to my parents that I wanted to be a social worker, a
Okay.
lot of the time they was like, what is that? They wouldn't understand. Right. And, I think, again, going back to this immigrant mentality, they would recognize three careers as being quote unquote successful: being a lawyer, being a doctor, or being an engineer. So when
Mm-hmm.
I come in here and tell them I want to be a social worker, they were like, will this pay well enough, right? To sustain you. Like, I did not cross over to this country for you to be, living a life that it's like, well, dang, she lifestyle. Can she still buy a house? And so a lot of the times, right, when I first graduated from social work school, I was looking for jobs, and like, the pay was like what did I do? Right. And so there is also this idea, kind of this message that would be like, oh girl, you're a social worker, you're gonna be poor for the rest of your life. Doesn't need to be, right? And it
Right.
led me to meet my field instructor, who was who I hope is still alive, a white man.
Mm-hmm.
And this man shared all his letters, and then there was this point where he made a point that he made well for himself, and that's
Mm-hmm.
where I'm comfortable. I own an apartment downtown Manhattan, X, Y, and Z. So that's where it clicked for me. And I was like, if this white man can sustain and live this life of, quote unquote luxury, then why can I not be able to do the same? Why
Right.
does it be thinking of like this ideology that, I'm gonna be broke for the rest
You're
for
gonna
the
be
rest.
a starving artist forever.
Exactly. This spoken and unspoken message of the outcome or the outlook that one will have in entering this kind of field. And so that's something, I mean it might be going into the solutions or how my way of addressing it, but it's more, and someone earlier said representation does matter. And like,
Yeah.
yes, it's a little bit of who is able to climb the ranks and go into leadership, but also a lot like how much people of color even want to do certain fields and certain crafts and careers. I know a lot. I had the privilege of attending a private university for college, and a lot of my peeps who are of color, they decided to go into finance or medicine, right? Because that's lucrative. That's where the money is at. And
Mm-hmm.
I made the choice of like, no, actually, I want to stick around. I want to be a mental health practitioner in practice within the community for the community. That often there was a lot of setbacks and a lot of comments that I received from my family and from like mainly being like, you went to all these schools to live in East Harlem? Like, yeah.
Like,
And
well, East Harlem is beautiful. I love it. It's so Puerto Rican.
but girl keeps getting these comments. It's like, but it's okay. It is okay.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So, with those examples that you mentioned, can you pull out one example and sort of get into it further and talk about how it either impacted you, it impacted your clients, or even your work?
Yeah.
Like, give me like a specific example where we could sort of unpack how white supremacy, how you witnessed it in the mental health field. And big up to Atlas Rum for participating in the chat. Atlas Rum is, I don't know who Atlas Rum is, but you're participating. Big up to you for that.
What would be an specific example, right? Of like, well, it's simple as, well, there's so many to really think about, right? And so, okay, so I think the most common one and the most recent, that is, and I think this stems from a bigger situation, right? So so as my training in social work, right, a lot of the books that and the ideas that that come up and that one is exposed to in training derived from white folk, right? And so it's their ideas and how they perceived and how they also understood societal organization. And from there, that's how they derive their conclusions and interpretations. And so that comes to say, so with that being said, there's the specific small example. It just possibly happened today, right? Earlier today. As part of the staff, the the whole epidemic of drug use is real, and I think that how in COVID living that's been booming more than ever. And so there was this training that staff received to be able to understand more what's happening and being able to provide and act on in this need. In one of the
Was there
pagers,
a specific drug that they was focusing on, or
or
just?
opiates, just the
Oh,
opioids, and
okay.
so just in general,
I have so many of those trainings.
yeah, so just in general, right?
Yeah.
But the specific example, it's like it came to me and it hit me. I was like, this is true. Is on the sheet, on the the fact sheet, there was like, what are some symptoms or signs to look out for when someone is experiencing perhaps an overdose? And one of them was, the person turning blue, going blue.
Uh-huh.
And, like I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay, I'm taking notes, me kind of like, all right, I'm trying to remember all of this because, that's important. And then the teacher who makes the question, who makes a reference, she's of color. And she's like, all right, so for people of color, who are Black, how do we look into that? Like, how do we distinguish between the person being their natural complexion versus they're turning blue, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then there was this kind of like, well, yeah, kind of like for a white person, you would obviously see the difference. You would see when they're turning blue versus when they're not. And then but then we have like thinking about more of just the population of like who is being considered and who you're,
That's so important.
right? Like
I'm listening. Yeah, go, go, go.
the little tiny examples, those examples of these details are meant
Yes.
of like, well, dang, it really hit me. Like, I appreciated that question and that push she made because I was like, well, dang, you're right. Like, how do you still acknowledge and recognize for all of that, for someone who is darker complexion, darker skinned, and, you might not be able to readily see and recognize when this person is turning blue versus not. And so that is just one example of how just how literature has been written, or just modalities or ways of working and practicing. Many times, it's kind of like there's this phrase of like, oh, are you a social worker who works by the books or is not? And truthfully, I like being eclectic, right? I like borrowing from different forms and modalities and approaches here and there, because I gotta meet the family where they're at. And it's kind of like this adjustment, or even there's something for me that does it for me that maybe it irks a nerve a little bit when kind of there is this distinction, like some in classes in like social work schools or workshops, of like how to practice SEL with like people of color.
Mm.
And I'm just like, but why is there that distinction? Kind
Mm.
of, does it kind of talk about like, well, is that the sink that I can drink or versus the white people can drink? Like, why should there be an distinction versus why can it be like wholesome and like inclusive, right?
Mm.
And like earlier, this definition, I might have kind of like taken some words here and there that I found is the idea of being exclusive, like excluding other people,
Mm-hmm.
right? So why is there having to be a distinction? Why can't it be, kind of like, let's talk about it, like let's really recognize and acknowledge like what's important. For example, in certain intake forms, a lot of a question is kind of like tabooed or discomforting, of like, were you born in this country, right?
Mm.
Why does that bring discomfort, or why does that make practitioners feel uneasy to ask that question when
Mm.
it's so important to even to say and to name?
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting that you're saying this because it almost, so what I'm hearing is, so what you're expanding on is how everything is filtered through the white lens, right?
Filter.
And it almost feels like there was a training a webinar that just happened this week and last week, and it's like a four-part webinar around racial trauma. And the whole time that I'm in these webinars, like, you know, listening to see, you know, what are they going to say different? Uh, I noticed that the audience, the webinar was for white folk, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was actually designed for white people. Because they're telling things, they're like training us on stuff that I already know, right? Because it's part of my human lived experience, right? As a person of color in America, right? As a black or brown person in America. And I don't need to be trained on that stuff. So I realized that that training wasn't for me, right? It was actually training mostly for white clinicians. And they don't advertise it like that, but that's what it was because I didn't feel included in that conversation.
Yep.
It almost felt like you training me on racial trauma, like, but it's commonsensical for me, right? It's not something that I need to be trained on, right? I get it by my lived experience, right, and seeing my community and how we've experienced white supremacy in America, in the United States.
Yeah.
And so, what it sounds like to me, and that really irks me because it's like, just say it's for y'all.
Yeah.
Don't drag us into these trainings, right? I
No.
was talking to one of the guests last week, Vanessa, and I think in that conversation I was talking about how we have diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings, but it really ain't for us. It
Yeah.
really ain't for us.
Yep.
Like you're talking about things that are very basic to our day-to-day lived experience. Like in a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings, it's really basically highlighting the fact that we're human beings,
Yeah.
right? That we here and we exist, and that we should be treated with empathy and respect. But that, if you're a mental health professional, that should be at the core, that foundational of you as a professional, right? That's not something you need to learn about. Like you don't know how to be compassionate and empathetic to your fellow human beings
Yeah.
because of your biases and prejudices and the stereotypes that you have in your head about us, right? And so then you should question whether you should be in this field or not, right? Because that's basic stuff. That's not like a hardcore thing to understand and grasp that human beings, regardless of what our color is or where we come from, we're actually all the same, right? As far as the fact that we're human.
Yeah.
And so when I'm hearing your example, I'm hearing everything being framed through the white lens. And when we're talking about the opioid crisis, and we're talking about somebody overdosing, and the idea that they will turn blue and not consider darker shades, right, in the human complexion, speaks to we're not talking about that community. We're not talking about saving that community. But it's not really, even when you think about the numbers, our community's issue, right? Because you think about how the opioid crisis happened. It was because, first of all, I don't know if everyone knows this, but I saw this somewhere and it made complete sense. The reason why it hit the white community in the way that it did is because doctors were biased against black people and saying and not giving them the prescriptions they needed for pain relief because they didn't trust them enough not to abuse them, or they didn't think they had that much pain, right? And so they would give the average white person these opioids because they trusted them with them and they figured they had more pain than a black
Yeah.
person. And so then it became that, but it was actually almost like a unintentional impact of racism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of bias and prejudice through the medical health, through the medical system, through the medical field,
Yeah.
and then it became what it became. So that's sort of an interesting thing. And so even when we're thinking about all the trainings that we have around it, because we had all the time there's trainings. I've done like 1,000 times. I've been in trainings, right, for the opioid epidemic. But it's not about my community.
Right. Right. You
It's
know
not
what?
about my community.
That's funny that you say that because now I'm thinking and reflecting, like, like I'm over here. So something I've been trying to do is like, keep just continuous learning, right? And so I've been like putting myself out to read some more books and to read articles just to stay in tune and stay informed. And a lot of the time now, subconsciously, is like I'm always being mindful of the author, like who writes this, and
Right.
I often find myself Googling, like, who is this author if I haven't heard. And so a lot of the time when most likely is a white author, I often, at the back of my head, I read, yes, but take it with a grain of salt, but just to understand the angle perhaps that he or she is coming from, and just from their experience, their training, or their learned experiences, like how much of it can I really take away? And like, that's like, I'm always filtering, like you said, right? Filtering, extrapolating things that I'm like, all right, this makes sense. And I would use this for my practice, but like always take it with like a grain of salt. And so maybe that's also, I'm realizing, granted, English is not my first language. So I do read. I realize that I read really slow. But a lot of the times, that reason why I'm reading slow is because I can read you a certain set of pages, because I always have to stop and think and reflect of like, how is this landing with me? How is this making sense for me? How can I practice using this also, or perhaps translating what I'm reading in this literature and translate it to meet the needs and where my clients are, who happen to be predominantly of color, right? So there's this extra legwork of this like kind of translation of how to be able to adjust, modify to utilize some of the frameworks that, yes, are evidence-based, good on, but like use it, right? Because I do, as a practitioner, I do believe in them, and I do believe in their strength, but I always have to kind of modify of like, how am I going to apply this, and how am I going to deliver this to a group of adolescents who are of color, and who we're going to, like, Yvonne, like, let's be honest, like, therapy is taboo in our families. Like, I tell my mother I'm going to see a therapist, she's going to be thinking I'm crazy. And like, I'll be like, nope, you don't got none of that. Like, there's nothing wrong with you. Just, like, shake it off and you'll be fine. Right. And there's a lot of kind of like adjustments and modifications and translations that I often find myself, having to do. Right. Like, when I experience something, when I hear something, when I see something, that it's like, dang, it can get exhausting.
Yes. And that's, oh my goodness. I feel like that was such an important point you just made. I mean, you really made because I feel like I didn't even think about the fact that I do that, right? And English is my first language, and Spanish is not really my second language. It's like Spanglish, but however, I still have to translate, like, when I think about what I'm reading, and if it's from a white author, I have to translate the jargony stuff, or the things that were meant for white folk that apply to white folk, and sort of recompute it in my brain to make it fit our communities. And it's so funny because I remember when I was at Lehman College in my graduate program, and I was in a policy class, and we was reading the book called The Jungle, right, which is about basically the European immigrants that came from Europe in the beginning, like the Polish and the Irish, and how they experienced the industrial sort of revolution in America and the United States. And it was a powerful book. I mean, it was powerful, right? We talked about this, basically a book that sort of talks about the real dilemmas that these European immigrants dealt with. But I felt like it was so dope, this book. It was so good, but I couldn't relate to it. Like, I felt like, and so I needed something else to bring in to sort of supplement that what I was reading. And I was reading at the same time the new Jim Crow, right? And the new Jim Crow is about mass incarceration. And how can I connect these two? Is because the policies that were created to create the new Jim Crow, right, which is mass incarceration of Black and brown folks, specifically, especially Black men. I had to bring that book into my work to sort of then apply it to what was happening in my community, right? So it's like thinking about the jungle, but that took extra work, right? To read two books at once for one class. And this book wasn't assigned to me. I just felt drawn to it, and I felt like it made sense, and it sort of applied to the policy class that I was in. And I never knew that I was translating until you just said it, right? Until you just said it. You just pointed out that you have to translate all this other stuff to make it sort of fit your community. And that is, I think we probably all do that without even know that we do that, right? Because we can't just take sort of that word for it. We have to, and we are evidence-based practitioners. We have lived experience that's evidence-based, right? And so just because we didn't have it sort of printed out on paper and sort of formalized for the white standard, we walk around as evidence-based practitioners because our community, right, and our lived experience is our evidence. You know what I'm saying? And so we don't need to have it published in order to be legitimate by sort of this white sort of corporate standard. we are that. And so I think we gotta also remember that too, right? Because we talk about evidence based, like we're not researchers. We
Yeah.
are researchers.
Yeah.
Right. And so I just think that was such an amazing sort of point you made, because the translation part is real and is exhausting as fuck.
Yeah. No, for real. Like
It really is.
and this is like, that's something I've been asking myself lately. Like, I'm like, well, why am I feeling like wow exhausted when in my head I'm doing all the right things, you know? I'm like, you know, doing the self-care, practicing that more than ever, and being, you know, compassionate to myself, and like being mindful, more mindful of what am I experiencing, how am I feeling, and being able to be okay with that and accept, welcome all these feelings. So in my mind, I'm like, I'm doing it right, but why am I like still like feeling this way, that it's like I just, my couch has been my favorite place ever. And again, it's like all of this, like, I mean, it comes with all of this it comes with the work, right? And it comes, like, I think that when one wants to do good work, or at least the best that one can do, I think it's this extra planning, preparation that requires. And I don't know if it's part of my person, if it's perhaps my inferior complex, that it's so deeply ingrained. But like, you know, I finished school, but yet girl is still showing up, and like, what other class can I take, you know? Why, what courses can I enroll in to just improve myself and improve myself? And is it like, it's oftentimes it's like, is it a point that I want to prove, that, you know, I want to like be like, I want to feel like I know what I'm doing, and earn and be deserving of these opportunities that I'm giving? Or is it truly, let me prepare myself and let me absorb a lot of, and of the knowledge, of the frameworks, of the literature, of the theories that exist, so I am as comprehensive as possible, to then be able to turnkey, and deliver to my community? Or is it both? Is it the two things that I'm trying to do, and to be able to deliver?
Yes. And so the impact is, what I'm hearing is that you're exhausted, which is what you said. Do you think that, and this is sort of, do you think that sort of, this is sort of more expanding? I love that. First of all, I love this. And what I heard though, they told me that that's not his real color. It's supposed to be orange. And I don't know the names, but there's four of them. But one has yellow. I think it's supposed to be orange. But do you think that uh, so when you think about like the fact that you have to translate, right? How does that trickle down to like your clients or the people you work with?
So here's one thing, and then this is kind of like, I fundamentally believe that knowledge is key, right? And so, and to the point where if people are able to recognize, and then this is, I think, intrinsically why I went into the field that I went to, because I did it to understand me. I knew that a lot, and I couldn't understand. I could not really be like, why am I like spiraling? Why am I going acting all types of ways, when truly I just want to be in peace? But I was farthest from that. And how does that translate and trickle down into the people, the communities, and the clients that I work with, is for that same reason, right? Of like I'm a huge advocate for like me working, like I was just asked, like, kind of why do I choose to work in a school setting, right? As a social worker is a very broad craft, and you can work anywhere, you can make it look however you want. But why do I continue to be in a school? And the reason why is because it allows me and gives me access, comprehensive access, to the young person, specifically adolescents, at such a pivotal time. I think it's beyond belief of how fundamental and pivotal, in that it can actually reframe a lot of their past experiences, to actually have to turn over and to make a change for themselves. And it all starts from the individual person, and understanding them and understanding themselves as to why they're showing up the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, and how they're thinking, you know. And then it goes to this cognitive triangle, which can be debatable, right? That a lot of it comes from the experiences that, you know, they've experienced, and how racism, how sexism, how classism comes in play to that, colorism comes in play to that. But I think at the end of the day is like, also, how is that work and those frameworks introduced to them? In my world, the young people, right? How is it introduced to them so that they're able to start connecting the dots
Right.
and connect what they're experiencing, what they're thinking, what they're doing to their reality. And then from there, decide on how they wish to go about it. And so,
So like
why
you're saying that you're able to like reframe it for them so they could now sort of sort of
not not reframe, but like offer them the frameworks, but just like scaffold it in a way that they can capture it and that they can understand and also become invested in it, right? We're talking about people, communities of color, where they're like, don't talk to me therapy, because that don't work. We're not about that. I was taught to really not believe in it, right? So it's more of like even just being strategic. I'm like, I'm giving you this is kind of like the theoretic framework but in a way that there's like it's digestible for them, and be like, all right. And then from there, they give them also the opportunity to feel empowered and just to run with it and take it how they want, because at the end of the day, the change comes from within.
yeah.
And so how can one give them the tools, the ingredients to go with it and make what they want out of it?
Mm-hmm. And so that's your extra duty, your extra task.
Yeah.
So I had a question that popped in my brain that's completely sort of that comes out of what you just said, and it's about the saying that it doesn't work. Therapy doesn't work, right? That doesn't work for us. But does it? Right? Does it work? I mean, I don't know if you saw the apology statements that were made by the American Psychological Association or the American Psychiatric Association or the NASW
Mm-hmm.
around being complicit with racism in America for so long. And because it's almost like we have to play two roles, right? Because we're people of color in the field, right? We're black and brown folk in the field, and we want to provide services to people who look like us, or we do provide services, and we got to convince them that it works, right? These things that we sort of are trained in, but does it? Like, I mean, if we being real about it, right? You feel what I'm saying?
I think it certainly does. I think therapy can show up in different ways too, right?
And
Like,
I'm being a devil's advocate.
yeah, for sure. And for me, the personal me, absolutely, right? The professional me, yes, indeed, right? And I think that at least the way that I often introduce therapy to the students and the young people whom I work with, it's more of like with the analogy of like, say you're buying a pair of shoes or just a pair of clothing, an item clothing, right? Like you go to the store and you see a piece that you like, you try it on, and you try it on to see if it fits you, if you're okay with it, if you feel if it pleases you, right? And then you decide if you purchase it. Same thing goes with therapy, in my opinion, in that first you need to understand or have an idea as to what it is that you like. For example, like, yeah, all for child therapy, but I do believe that there is something to therapy and in the individual entering once they're at a certain age, when they're, if not at an adult, close to an adult, right? And it's truly for like, one, identifying what is it that you're seeking. Is it that you're seeking to feel more at ease with yourself? Is it that you're seeking how to better, communicate or interact with a certain group of people or individuals in your life, right? And like, but more importantly, not even so much what you're seeking, rather what works for you. The same way of like how you go and try on, like when I go to the store, I know certain types of jeans I'm not gonna put on. I make sure I look for those high-waisted jeans because they have shown that look the best on me and make me feel the best, most comfortable. So kind of the therapy, am I going to be looking for a white therapist? Absolutely not. Am I going to be seeking kind of a who, is younger than me? No, because
Hell no.
that this person can actually help me. right? Do I need a therapist who speaks Spanish? Yes, because my emotional language is Spanish. So when I go when I go into that state, into that mental headspace where it's all pure emotion, I go into Spanish. So if the therapist can't understand what in the world I'm saying, he or she is not going to be able to support me,
Right,
right?
right.
There are just a few factors and things that I have recognized that are important for me that I need in my therapist to be able to support me and get me through the goals that I wish and that I desire.
And do you think that all of us, even just because we're black or brown identified, do you think that we all have the capacity to be able to translate it in such a way that we're not sort of perpetuating sort of oppressive practices to our community? And I'm saying this only because I've seen us,
Oh yeah.
right? And I've seen the harm that we cause. I've been part of causing harm as myself, right? And and I wonder if I think we have to have sort of a sort of critical race theory perspective inside of the work we do, where we have to bring it back to sort of the foundational, the roots of this, the historical context of this particular country that we live in. Even the whole Western Hemisphere is not even this country. And so I'm wondering, and it's just things that are coming up as you're speaking. I'm wondering if we all have the capacity as black and brown mental health professionals or therapists or practitioners to actually do that kind of work. Because that's an extra whole situation, right? It's an extra layer of sort of self self reflection and almost like this on the job learning,
Yeah.
right? Sort of having that critical race theory perspective. And I'm saying critical race because a lot of the when you think about white supremacy, right? You know, it's all about race, and then when you think about inside of white supremacy, you have homophobia, you have transphobia, you have and so on and so forth, right? And like all these things that you can tie into white supremacy. So, I mean, and this is just me thinking right now in this moment about, wow, that's a lot of work, and can we all do that? Are we all equipped to do that as black and brown?
I feel like I wanna say, yeah, that's the hope, right? There's a hope, and I think that yes, it's possible. I think, but certain conditions do are important, right? Like I think that, I have been fortunate that as of lately, a lot of, supervisors and or mentors who can provide me some sort of supervision, clinical supervision in my work have been of color. And I think that, I mean, I know that I'm grateful for that and I'm privileged for that because not many practitioners can, especially of color, can say that,
Right,
right?
right. Yeah,
But
it's true.
I believe in the power and in the importance of supervision. I think that every mental health practitioner should have that and should have the space and really utilize supervision to explore the self, the self as a therapist and how you're showing up in working with others, right? And something that kind of thing I was just thinking about this earlier is was would be your pushes, Antonio, when when we were at West Brooklyn together and you would have those group soup sessions, what is it, the AC check-ins that I
Seconds.
run. I also used to push back that the personal does not blend and bleed
I,
into the
I,
professional.
those are good
Now,
AC seconds.
yes, but
Yeah.
like say, as much as that made me feel so uncomfortable then, I am eternally grateful for. And because it's you're right, it's very inevitable. We're human beings, right? We have our intrinsic biases based on what our learned experiences have formed us to do, right? And like, how it's conditioned us to think, it's conditioned us to act. And so shoot, yes, it's inevitable that you're going to bring in your personal stuff at times and it's going to bleed into the work and how you perceive this person that you're working with. But then that is why those conditions, those 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 tools such as supervision should be in place and should be required for that purpose of like pushing the therapist, pushing the provider to be like, you experienced X, Y, and Z. You hesitated. Where did that come from? What did you experience? The why. What is pushing you? What is keeping you from delivering a practice that you may do for someone else? And That's how I usually tune in when my work of like, what am I experiencing? What am I feeling right now that perhaps it's blurring or it's influencing how I'm going to interact or how I'm going to intervene in this situation with whoever the client is.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So give me a time check.
It's 8:06.
Oh no. Okay. Last question. So can you please share a solution, right? When you think about like how white supremacy shows up in the mental health field, what is one nice solution that you can leave us with?
Representation matters. I think that the fact that like at least just in the schools, in the trainings that we go to, I'm still stuck on this idea that I only had one professor of color. So how can we, one, spread joy and awareness that in these careers there's success. Sorry, my phone is dying. If a person of color wants to pursue these kind of careers, it's just as successful as you being a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer. So go for it and be okay with it, regardless of what your family. And again, this is me personally speaking, right? Because I experienced all of this kind of like doubt and like, what is she doing? Like, really, Yvonne? You really went all these schools you went to then eventually become a social worker. Wow. Okay. And so like representation is like how to be able to bring your knowledge or expertise into training younger generations coming into this. I wholeheartedly believe in like internship programs and like how for me, for one, I'm about to set myself up to be, I'm not a supervisor, but how can I supervise social work interns? When I get older and I'm too much, I can't be running back and forth, up and down. Do I want to go back to school and eventually get that, higher degree to be able to teach at a university? Do I want to teach in these social work schools, master's programs? And what's the course that I would teach? Supervision. Right? Because again, my only professor was an elective professor. So how can these core classes be actually taught? How can field instruction be taught by a professor of color?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I think for one, a simple, I hope, right, and I see as a solution is representation. How can the younger work generation of practitioners be able to see and be like, yo, you look like me, and and it's my way is not the, and understanding that how I practice and my understanding of things is not the only way.
Right. And even inside of representation, I think what's important, right, which I think we don't speak about often, is when we say representation, we don't mean the whitewashed version of us, right? Because a lot of times representation looks the part, but we have this. What happens a lot of times is when people go through higher ed, when people are in sort of white dominant spaces, even though they look the part, their mindset is very sort of white standardish, right? It's whitewashed. And so that representation and the spirit of that representation is missing from the conversation. And so you mean authentic representation of who we are and sort of what we bring to the table that's authentic for our own values, our cultural norms, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And the hope is, right? The hope is that these kind of conversations, like the movement you're leading, Antonio, and like other people too, is that at some point one day, like, universities can be more acceptive, right? And like that's at the end of I can see that being as a challenge, as a setback. But like, sure, well, how is my curriculum or my teachings going to be received by those in those universities? Are they going to be all right with it, cool with it, right? And so, but again, I think it's the grounding component of it. Like, what can the individuals together in the collective do?
Right.
Be able to kind of to change what's happening. But in the time being, it's like, what are you doing in the now to eventually be able to build up?
I got it. Well, Yvonne, we ran out of time. We usually don't go this late. I mean, just a few minutes late, but I also started exactly at 7 o'clock. Usually I start like at 6:50. So I could have, at this point, I needed to do my little rant in the beginning. So I just want to thank you for showing up to this IG live. I really appreciate it. I think it's super important that you lend your conversation and your voice into the space. And I really love the whole point that you talked about around translation, right? And how that looks as far as like the extra work we have to do. So thank you, Yvonne. I know the spring is coming, and so is the summer. So, you know, I'll be seeing you on these streets.
Yes.
So,
Dance.
get your dancing shoes ready.
Oh,
They're ready? All right. So thank you all who actually showed up as well. I appreciate your attendance and your participation in the chat. I apologize that we only have an hour, so it's almost hard to get into chatting back and forth with other people in the chat. We got to do something else where we could do like sort of lives. I'm thinking of doing something else where we do lives where we could just chat about different topics and have like a guest and we'll just like chat with the people. If you're interested in, so this is part of an extension of the Freedom Fighters of the Minds initiative. If you're interested in joining our Freedom Fighters of the Mind initiative, we have another meeting coming up in April, and our next live is in April. And you can email me at antonio@theliberatedself.org so that you can get the Zoom link and so on and so forth. That being said, thank you again, Yvonne. Would you like to say any last final words before I end this live?
Yeah, thank you, Antonio. You know, I was nervous of like what to expect. But I think it was good, you know, and yeah, even it's interesting also kind of like I know you mentioned this and this happened to me, like as one talks out loud, one comes to some realizations. You know, of like, oh shoot, I didn't think about this before. And I know that often happens, and that's something like you listen, like whether it's with a therapist, whether it's with a friend, whether it's with X, Y, and Z, it's always important to talk it out.
Yeah.
Talk with, because from the actual active action of talking it out, can you get a lot out of it and a lot of personal insights from it.
Absolutely. And that's the whole point of the conversation, right?
Yeah.
Is to sort of get it out, right? And sort of get insight from it at the same time you're speaking and other people are hearing as well.
Absolutely.
All right now. Deuces. I'll
Bye.
see you soon, Yvonne.
Sounds good.
Deuces, everyone.